Hi there, I'm Ahsan Shaw, and you are watching me on YouTube and Facebook Live. I'm a business analyst and freelance writer, and approximately more than 150 business, academic, and research articles are published under my name. Today, we are going to talk about economic economics term as a human exchange. Is it credibility, interest, goodwill, or something else? And we have been discussing business and economics topics for the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks, and it's been going very well. And I'm very thankful to my guest, Edward Konowicz. Now it's time to introduce uh, to you my guest. He has joined us from Virginia, United States.
Yeah, hi,
Hi,
good
Ed.
morning or
Hi, Ed.
good
How are
evening.
you?
Good.
Okay. So, how is the weather there?
Well, it's nice. It's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just enough that you can walk with just you know, shirt on and
Mm-hmm.
t-shirt and shorts. But if you bicycled, you would need a sweatshirt.
Okay. The weather here is very cold. It's getting cold now. And yeah, that's why I'm wearing a sweater. So, how do you approach this topic? Uh, Economic term as a human exchange.
Well,
Is
I
it?
think there's always double meanings to language,
Mm-hmm.
which is there's a phonetic resemblance which poets use
Mm-hmm.
between normal words and other words. And
Mm-hmm.
there's second and third and fourth meanings to words. So this
Mm-hmm.
is sort of like what used to be called liberal arts, which
Mm-hmm.
was an artist is looking for deeper meaning in words, meaning more connections.
Mm-hmm.
And I think economic terms have a lot of double meanings,
Mm-hmm.
which is they have a lot of relevance to our lives outside of economics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think economics dominates human beings to some extent. It doesn't.
Yes.
So we have to look at, well, what does this ultimately mean in
Mm-hmm.
terms of I would say human consciousness, which is we're
Mm-hmm.
different than animals, and I think why we're different than animals is we have a deeper understanding of right from wrong. We can discern what's correct, incorrect, what's reasonable, unreasonable, and we can discuss it. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
animals have very lengthy discussions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What if you look at the behavior of human beings and you see the cruelty to a great extent? Look at the slavery, the example of slavery. Animals do not make slaves. What about burning witchcraft and also the crusades? Animals don't do that kind of stuff.
No, well, the question is, and it's a large question, religion addresses it, what's good versus evil?
Mm-hmm.
And today we say what's reasonable versus unreasonable, or
Mm-hmm.
what is um, efficient versus non efficient. I mean, we can
Mm-hmm.
define love as harmony, that we're trying to reduce costs.
Mm-hmm.
We can look at economics as trying to reduce costs, but we need a bigger view of what a cost is. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
you make something because you contaminated the environment and didn't process the waste, that's a cost on human health.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to think beyond economic terms and see what they apply to. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we all just start with it, so it doesn't sound like we're just philosophizing. I like the word principle. When you put money in a bank,
Mm-hmm.
the your initial deposit is called your principal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think basically what life is about is you invest in a principle.
Mm-hmm.
You have certain principles or standards, whether they're religious or secular. you have certain standards. In fact, I think that was true with most um, armies, the Roman legion. Each legion had different principles. For
Mhm.
example, there were some Roman legions that were vegetarians that did not eat meat, and
Mhm.
their principle was not to eat meat. And of
Mhm.
course, the Romans, and I'm not promoting the Romans, but when we
Mhm.
think about financial development, probably the empire that introduced modern financing was the
Mhm.
Romans, because
Mhm.
the ancient Egyptians didn't use that. And the
Mhm.
Romans saw sanitation as really important. Like we shave today. The Romans
Mhm.
insisted you. Now that was must have been hard. It isn't like
Mhm.
they had razors.
Mhm.
It must have been very difficult to shave every day. And if you look
Mhm.
at the Roman legions,
Mhm.
they're always shaved. And of
Mhm.
course, Rome built extensive baths and water supplies
Mhm.
and believed in sanitation. That was a standard of Rome was sanitation. So that was a principle.
Mhm.
So they could invade a country, and this is
Mhm.
not really known. I'm
Mhm.
saying wars are more spiritual. So
Mhm.
Romans could invade a country claiming the country was too dirty and too
Mhm.
diseased and
Mhm.
claim they would supply the people with more
Mhm.
plumbing and
Mhm.
sanitation, and they
Mhm.
would require people to shave. In
Mhm.
fact, they called their enemies barbarians,
Mhm.
which means a beard.
Mhm. You have mentioned a very good point here. Uh, the system of sanitation. If you look at the history, then the system of sanitation is very old. Even here in India, the old civilization, Mohenjo-daro. Then you see here, we have the evidence that they used to have. The streets and the system of bathroom, the most advanced system that we are using today, and they used to have the same system hundreds and thousands of years ago.
The Romans were plumbing masters. They used to
Mhm.
fill the
Mhm.
Colosseum with water
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
stage naval battles for entertainment. Can you
Mhm.
imagine taking a modern arena,
Mhm.
like a superdome, and filling it
Mhm.
with water and having
Mhm.
ships put on a show of battle? So the
Mhm.
Romans were extremely skillful at
Mhm.
plumbing.
Mhm.
But there's other technologies.
Mhm.
What they were not skillful at was
Mhm.
delivering food that was not contaminated.
Mhm.
So the Dutch, which were the
Mhm.
Germans,
Mhm.
developed glass.
Mhm.
And glass is a much better container to use for food than
Mhm.
clay pots, particularly those painted with lead paint.
Mhm.
So the the Romans, um, they kind of failed in securing their food.
Mhm.
But they made it free. Breads and circuses. The Romans made sure they were generous with their food,
Mhm.
and that was a principle of theirs. But a lot of financing or supplies, which we
Mhm.
call logistics in war, we don't
Mhm.
really understand. If you look
Mhm.
at ancient armies,
Mhm.
whether in China or India or
Mhm.
in Europe, you're
Mhm.
dealing generally with at least 10,000 men.
Mhm.
A normal large army was 30,000. That
Mhm.
and that's what Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great moved with 30,000 troops, and they
Mhm.
also carried sometimes women and children with them. So how do
Mhm.
they get all their food? I
Mhm.
mean, that's a
Yeah,
major
it's a
part of.
yeah, that's a very good, interesting questions. If they are moving with their families and they are in a mass scale, like hundreds and thousands of people. So, what about the food and the other sanitation system? How they are managing it? I think economics is a very interesting.
So history, it doesn't really describe it. They'll say they're foraging, but
Mm-hmm,
you know how much food you know if you have a holiday and you have a family over 3 to 5 people.
mm-hmm,
Buying the food and preparing it is quite a lot of work. But we're
mm-hmm,
not talking about 5 people. We're talking about 30,000. And we're
mm-hmm,
not talking about being in your house. We're
mm-hmm,
talking about being on the road. So
mm-hmm,
how were these supplies done? And there must have been my own guess. This is a guess because
mm-hmm,
this is a lot to do with um, economics. How do you supply food? Is a very
mm-hmm,
important economic concept. My guess
mm-hmm,
is there were huge storage areas locally where food
mm-hmm,
was stored. Because
mm-hmm,
how are you going to harvest in January or May? I
mm-hmm,
mean, generally you're going to wait till after the summer, the harvest.
mm-hmm,
So it's not like the soldiers could go around and forage the fields.
mm-hmm,
And the average family would only store food for themselves, maybe a little
mm-hmm,
bit more, but the average family was like 10, 15 people.
mm-hmm,
And that, if you just do the math, you would have to for 1,000 people, you would need to to forage 100 farms,
mm-hmm,
and for 10,000 people, you need to forage a
mm-hmm,
thousand farms, and that doesn't make sense.
mm-hmm,
So supplies or logistics was a major thing, and we don't look at it. But most of the great supposedly conquerors, whether it's Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar,
mm-hmm,
Napoleon, they were excellent engineers,
mm-hmm,
and logistics and supplies were a major part of it,
mm-hmm,
particularly to keep their troops mobile.
mm-hmm,
So, and this is where I think financing came about by armies. I
mm-hmm,
mean, if you were going to have an army, you had to have a
mm-hmm,
way of supplying your army. So the
mm-hmm,
word finance or financial comes from the word fine,
mm-hmm,
FINE, to
mm-hmm,
fine or to put a tax on people.
mm-hmm,
So normal exchange goes on in a town or a village, and this I think really was the basis of World War II,
mm-hmm,
was extending the financial system because in Eastern Europe, where so many people were killed during World
mm-hmm,
War II, probably 30 million people or more were killed in Eastern Europe. But
mm-hmm,
Eastern Europe was mostly small villages. They
mm-hmm,
didn't have money. A
mm-hmm,
village just traded their milk, their eggs, their meat, their potatoes,
mm-hmm,
their beets. They
mm-hmm,
just traded within themselves, and we don't really get a financial system in that area of significance, I don't think,
mm-hmm,
until World War I and II, and the army started to come in there. And of course, before that, there was Napoleon, and the whole issue of Prussia rising and becoming Germany.
mm-hmm,
There is, and all this is based on the movement of armies. I mean,
mm-hmm,
whether it was the Khans in um, the Mongolian area
mm-hmm,
that organized, whether they were in an empire or not. We're talking about in China, 30,000 to 100,000 in an army. That meant when two armies met, it was between 100 to 200,000 people. How were these soldiers fed?
What
Uh,
about you haven't mentioned the Vikings in Europe and the Crusade Muslim and Christian Crusaders in the uh, 12th, 13th century,
yeah, the
and
logistics of that are
Mhm,
immense because you're so far
mhm,
away from your homeland.
mhm. So I think the main issue they were facing is logistic, and the only reason I came up with I just come up with, and I
Okay,
think
so
they were stealing and and thievings from different towns, and they were looting from town to town. This is the
Yeah, well, it
only possible.
had to be that. And
Hmm.
some of the
Yes.
crusaders, like the Knights Templar, became
Hmm.
banking institutions.
Hmm.
So banking, I think, and financial institutions were based on war.
Hmm.
Because you had this whole supply line issue. How
Hmm.
do you supply shoes? How do you supply clothes? How do you supply food, particularly
Hmm.
to thousands of people moving? As even the
Hmm.
pilgrimages. You
Hmm.
got thousands of people taking pilgrimages,
Hmm. And
and
they have got families with them, their cares, their wives, and they can't move uh, food with them for months. The only reason, I think, the only possible explanation is that they were simply looting from town to town, and they were simply kept on moving.
yeah,
What
but
do you think?
if they were looting town from town, and most
Mm-hmm.
towns
Mm-hmm.
were only 20,000 people. I mean, you could have a city, but
Mm-hmm.
when we today we think of cities as 50,000, 100,000. That was supposedly not true.
Mm-hmm.
So how did a 30,000 army forage enough food from a 10,000 population town?
Mm-hmm.
And this is not really discussed. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Historians ignore
Mm-hmm.
finance. They
Mm-hmm.
really do it. I mean, they talk about money. They talk about looting.
They.
And when a Roman general like Pompey or Julius Caesar, when they came back from a war, they would have
Mm-hmm.
a parade in which they would show the money that they have. And Caesar
Mm-hmm.
actually had, I think, like $1 billion today. And they would
Mm-hmm.
give some of the money to the population and the soldiers so that the people were happy and identified with the war conquest.
Mm-hmm.
So the we don't quite understand it because I know this from American history, and
Mm-hmm.
this is related to the history of India. In
Mm-hmm.
order for to have clothing, you need comfortable clothing, and cotton was the most comfortable clothing,
Yeah.
particularly for work or travel,
Mm-hmm.
because it absorbs sweat.
Mm-hmm. And India
So,
was the best place for cotton.
so the original making of cotton was very labor intensive, so it
Mm-hmm.
required a slave system.
Mm-hmm.
So the American Indians raised cotton. That's why I
Mm-hmm.
think Columbus called them Indians because he
Mm-hmm.
saw the cotton clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And cotton required slavery. So the slavery in the Americas was already there before the Europeans came. The American
Mm-hmm.
Indians had slaves, and that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of hidden in history. And it's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing with the caste system in India. The lower
Yes.
caste or the untouchables were
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do the work, such as
Mm-hmm.
the gathering of cotton and the weaving or
Mm-hmm.
the actual making of the clothes.
Mm-hmm. Even
So
it's still the caste system still works and still exists in Pakistan today. People
I,
don't
I
if people don't get married with the other caste, and even in the 21st century with science and technology and everything, people still believe in the caste system. They still believe that marrying their daughter or marrying their son to the other caste would bring a lot of troubles into the family.
yeah, this class system, which we
Hmm.
also see in Europe,
Hmm.
particularly during the French Revolution,
Hmm.
there was the first class, which was the clergy or the
Hmm.
religious,
Hmm.
and the second class was the wealthy or landowners,
Hmm.
and then there was the workers or farmers or peasants,
Hmm.
and or the common people. And we
Hmm.
didn't really see representation of the common people or plebeians and the Romans until the cities built, and there was artisans such as carpenters and builders, and blacksmiths that could make the armor. So the class system or the caste system
Mhm.
was also a large part of the financial structure,
Mhm.
which is uh, there are, a city would have a wall around it
Mhm.
to protect itself from armies. And when um, a society became too cruel and people started to starve, like
Mhm.
during the French Revolution,
Mhm.
then war was developed. But was war the solution to the scarcity of food? Did hundreds of thousands of people go to
Mhm.
war and about 50% of them killed in order to
Mhm.
solve the food shortages? Which is
Mhm.
just before the French Revolution, there was massive food shortages, a
Mhm.
financial crisis.
Mhm.
And then Napoleon um, developed as a leader, from military
Mhm.
experience,
Mhm.
and conducted these wars, moving hundreds of thousands of troops. And it was
Mhm.
not uncommon in a battlefield for about 25 to 50% of the troops being killed. So we have to
Mhm.
raise the question
Mhm.
whether market issues such as a shortage of food
Mhm.
were solved by war and killing people.
Mhm.
This was even
Yeah.
particularly in China. If you study the history of China with the
Mhm.
Khans, Genghis Khan and
Mhm.
then Kublai Khan, their
Mhm.
armies were 100,000. They were moving
Mhm.
100,000 people at a
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
But then they were killing half
Mhm.
of them. Half of them
Mhm.
would wind up dead. And in
Mhm.
the Roman Civil War, it was huge because the two Roman generals, Pompey and Gaius Julius Caesar, were
Mhm.
fighting each other, so the Roman troops were killing each other.
Mhm.
So I
So
I think
it's
I
a
think the
possibility.
biggest skill which a lot
Mhm.
of financing is based upon is killing.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the countries with the biggest military tended to
Mhm.
be the richest. That's like the
Mhm.
United States. The United States has the largest military in the world,
Mhm.
has probably killed more people than any
Mhm.
other country in the modern
So
world, and has the
yeah.
most money.
Yes, and it
So
also means having a bigger army means more numbers mean showing your strength and proving yourself that you are the stronger.
and I think a large part of that money system comes from war and the
Hmm.
financing of war. But the
Hmm.
interesting thing is, it isn't just who has the better weapons.
Hmm.
War is frequently based on intelligence or information. And then
Hmm.
we're going to be coming to our financial terms, such as principle.
Hmm.
Julius Caesar's principle was to forgive as much as possible and don't take that much vengeance. So
Hmm.
he was able to unify Rome because
Hmm.
before that time, if an army rebelled, there was a unit of 10 men, and 9 men
Hmm.
had to kill 1 man because they
Hmm.
mutinied.
Hmm.
And most of the early armies, like by the Khans, Genghis Khan,
Hmm.
they're very strict. If anyone mutinied or resisted, they would kill and destroy everyone in a town,
Hmm.
practically. So different principles were held, which is your principle is what you're investing in, and you need people to have interest in your principle. And I
Hmm.
started the principle of the Romans was sanitation. They
Hmm.
developed plumbing. They were amazing engineers that could build a bridge in a day to cross a
Hmm.
river. And
Hmm.
so their principles was roads, plumbing,
And
economic supplies.
they were very organized when we talk about the armies.
Very what? I didn't hear that.
Very organized.
Yeah, they're very organized. And we
Yes,
saw that with we
yes,
see
when we
this.
talk about. when we talk about the armies, and they were very organized, just like the modern armies and modern warfare we speak today, and they were behaving and moving like this, like the modern time.
So we what we have, and I discussed this before,
Hmm.
was the relation of religion or beliefs to money. And today I'm
Hmm.
trying to cover and talk about the relationship of armies and
Hmm.
war to money.
Hmm.
And I want to kind of bring them both together
Okay.
because when you have a priest like
Hmm.
a pope or a bishop in the West, they
Hmm.
wear a certain costume. It's called a
Hmm.
vestment.
Hmm.
And the vestment or the clothing represented their beliefs. So,
Hmm.
for example, there was the Eastern Orthodox that was based on Constantinople that moved up to Russia, and then there was the Western Christianity, which was based on the Pope in Rome, and they had different vestments or costumes or clothing.
Hmm.
So the when we talk about an investment, we're talking
Hmm.
about you're investing in a belief system. You may
Hmm.
believe in a corporation such
Hmm.
as Microsoft, or you
Hmm.
may believe in the government and invest in government bonds.
Hmm.
But basically, investment is based upon belief, which is credibility or
Yes.
reputation. And we
Hmm.
talked about that before, which is
Yes, we have
your
talked about it. Mm.
and 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 what a bank is controlling. You know, you have a riverbank, and the
Mhm,
riverbank is like this natural wall that
mhm,
controls the flow of the water. And water is an essential supply, you know,
mhm,
more important than food. You can go 2 or 3 weeks without food,
mhm,
but you can only go 2 or 3 days generally without water.
mhm,
So basically, financing is controlling by banks, which is walls. So you have Wall Street. Wall
yes,
Street is the major financial um, financial section of the
market,
world,
yes,
market of the world. And
yes,
what is a wall? It's particularly used in war to
mhm,
defend an area. So
yes,
Wall Street has to defend its credibility, its belief, and its
mhm,
belief is the vestments, which is your investments, which
mhm,
is the clothing you wear, such as a tie and a
mhm,
suit and a
mhm,
white shirt, is your vestments, which
mhm,
is a belief system. We're looking at a combination of religion and war, which was
mhm,
always the case. I
mhm,
mean, so many of the wars are based on religion,
mhm,
which is what is your beliefs.
mhm,
So we don't have a free market. We have a controlled currency. The current or
mhm,
the river is controlled by the banks of the river.
mhm,
And when the
mhm,
river overflows, the
mhm,
banks are ruptured or we have a
mhm.
bankruptcy
Yes,
because the consciousness cannot be controlled. So that's what I want to approach today. I want to get into it as fast as possible so
mhm,
people hear some new ideas. I'm
mhm,
saying that financing or economics is based on war and religion,
mhm,
which is logistics and beliefs.
mhm,
See, war really is logistics. How do I
mhm,
supply 50,000 troops in the field so I can project power?
mhm,
See, we think of war as, oh, you got good fighters and you have a stronger um, army in terms of weapons.
mhm,
And that's what's emphasized. But really, the generals were very much aware of logistics and try to cut off the supplies of the opposing armies. So
mhm,
the best armies knew how to maintain their supplies. And
mhm,
this was the whole issue in World War II, particularly oil and gas for the tanks, for the
mhm,
planes, because you couldn't have your tanks they wouldn't do any good if you ran out of gas.
Mhm.
So the aerial bombardment was used, particularly by the so-called allies, the British and the Americans, to disrupt the supplies of the Germans.
Mhm.
So but this all resulted in modern financing, which is
Mhm.
basically how do you control what people believe or see? What learning and perception go together. We see
Mhm.
basic shapes and stuff
Mhm.
based on our learning experience. In fact, people have been blind all their life.
Mhm.
If they have an operation that fixes them, they
Mhm.
are under a lot of pain and anxiety because they can't tell what they're seeing. It takes years to learn to see. We take
Mhm.
it for granted. We think, oh, you just have eyes that work, but really
Mhm.
your perception is based upon learning, and you organize according to shapes that you memorize, such as my head is oval,
Mhm.
the couch I'm sitting on is rectangular,
Mhm.
and we remember these shapes, and then we don't see everything in front of our eyes. We only see about 10%, and the
Mhm.
rest is simulated from our memory.
Mhm.
So it takes a long time to learn to see, like it does to learn to walk. Anyone who's been in an accident and lost their ability to walk can tell you
Mhm.
how long it takes to learn again how to walk. There's a lot of balancing, muscle
Mhm.
control, and
Mhm.
walking, but there's even more in seeing.
Mhm.
So
It happened
seeing,
to me. It happened to me when I was younger. I was in, I think, uh, 12 or 13 years old. I had an accident, and I was on bed for around about 3 or 4 months. And when I got better, when my when the my heel was the bone of my heel, it was simply recovered, and it got better, and it was very difficult for me to learn to walk again, and I relearned the whole process of walking. So it was an intentional or rational experience for me.
now I've been through that twice. I've been crippled
Okay.
twice.
Okay.
The
Uh,
and it takes a
okay.
long
When
time. And it's
mm,
scary. When you first start
yeah,
to walk, you're
yes,
afraid of falling, and you're afraid of not getting back to where you started
yes,
because you just started walking again. The
yes,
thing is to see, which is to
mm,
see with your eyes and to hear, actually
mhm,
takes longer. Takes longer
mhm,
to learn a language. We recognize that. For example, if you
mhm,
moved from Pakistan to China,
mhm,
it could take you 2 years to learn the language. Could take
yes,
you longer.
or even
And,
longer. Yes.
and the same thing is true with our eyes.
Mhm,
So the currency represents how we perceive the world.
mhm,
So when we're talking about money, we're talking about currency, we're talking
mhm,
about how people perceive the world. And
mhm,
that's hard for people to understand. On horses, particularly when they were in cities, they used to put on what was called blinders on each
mhm,
side of the horse so they
mhm,
wouldn't get spooked. Because a
mhm,
horse is an intelligent animal, about like a 5-year old, and
mhm,
and they could get distracted, or something could happen at in the peripheral vision that could
mhm,
cause them to jump or run. So
mhm,
you put on the what was called blinders on a
mhm,
horse, and
mhm.
that's the
Okay.
walls. We
Mhm.
we
To
we
keep them
see with
focused.
certain walls in our
Mhm,
society, and those walls are are basically directing our economic activity.
mhm,
So the banks of a river direct the river, the banks of economics direct our economic or work activity by
mhm,
directing how we see the world.
Hmm.
And
And
this is
that
based
direction is based on our belief and credibility.
yeah, based upon our belief and credibility, which
Hmm.
is our credibility is based on the beliefs in the country. For
Hmm.
example, if you're in the United States, you used to have to be Christian to be believable. Today, atheism dominates in the United States. And if you're
Hmm.
religious, you tend to be not believable. You don't get as
Hmm.
much credit.
Hmm.
So credit is belief or credibility.
Hmm. Just
And
like
those,
here, if, for instance, if you are here in Pakistan, then the only reason people are going to believe you if you're a Muslim. If you are non-Muslim, then people aren't going to believe you.
right. And if you were in India before the
Yes,
separation, if you were
yeah,
Muslim with the Hindus dominating, you weren't believed.
yes. If you, the only reason people are going to believe you is you are Hindu. So it means the majority, the belief of majority works. You have to follow the belief of majority.
Right. You're supposed to follow the belief, which is the currency, how people
Hmm.
see reality,
Hmm.
which is a comment of the current or the now.
Hmm.
How do people perceive reality is the
Yes.
currency, and the banks, which are the controlling the flow of the river, are
Hmm.
controlling to some extent what people's principles are.
Hmm.
Now, you could have high principles,
Hmm.
which is you could be a very loving person.
Hmm.
There may be no interest in what you're doing. For example, you could be
Hmm.
a loving person and take care of a lot of homeless people. But
Hmm.
that doesn't mean because you're doing a lot of work taking care of homeless people that you're going to be wealthy.
Yes.
But you know, it's a mixture of principles.
Hmm.
There's a term used to launder your money or money
Yes.
launder.
Yes. Money
That, that,
laundering.
that means a person is gaining money from illegal activity or immoral activity, and
Hmm.
they need to raise their credibility.
Hmm.
So they might open up a charity. I mean, it was pretty well understood or thought, or
Hmm.
it was the opinion of academics that the Rockefellers, after establishing their mining communities and oil
Hmm.
communities, had damaged and even killed indirectly so many people. They had a money. They had a Their money was considered dirty. So
Hmm.
then they had to form a charity, you know,
Hmm.
the Rockefeller Foundation, to act like
Hmm.
they were good people giving away money, just like
Hmm.
Caesar did. Caesar gave
Hmm.
away a lot of his money in order to money launder
Hmm.
or make themselves look more legitimate. Now, that's a
Hmm.
different definition of money laundering. Money laundering means
Hmm.
a person usually needs a business where they can explain they're making money. For example, a drug dealer may make millions of dollars in Central America.
Hmm.
So, what he might open up is restaurants. So, even though he's losing money in the restaurants, he
Hmm.
can write on the books he's making money, and then he has an excuse for his income. I mean,
Yes.
it's the issue with Al Capone in the United States, who was considered organized crime because
Hmm.
he was selling alcohol or alcoholic drinks when it was illegal.
Hmm.
So he actually opened up soup kitchens for the homeless. He actually fed the homeless, Al Capone. And when he
In the
was put in
disguise.
jail, he was
Hmm.
put in jail for not paying income tax on
Hmm.
his illegal income.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of financial terms
Hmm. There's a history
represent,
behind them.
yeah, they represent an actual reality behind them.
Hmm.
I think Christianity, Isa or Jesus or Yeshua, he saw
Hmm.
this very clearly. What are you going to base your exchange on? Is it going to be based on love or is it going to
Hmm.
be based on money?
Hmm.
And of course, Caesar represented money, that
Hmm.
your exchange of food or clothing or
Mhm.
um, work was based on money. And I think Isa or Jesus or Yeshua
Mhm.
taught it should be based on love. It shouldn't be
Mhm.
based on money.
Mhm.
So our wealth is based on two things: our principles,
Mhm.
but our principles have to have interest. If
Mhm.
people are not
Oh,
interested in our
mhm.
principles, we're
Mhm.
not going to be wealthy.
Yeah. If we follow the exchange system of love, I think it the only reason it doesn't have the only thing it doesn't have is motivation. When people start exchanging things based on love, and I think human civilization wouldn't have uh, wouldn't have advanced to that level if it was based on love. What do you think?
Yeah, I didn't get the last two sentences. There was interference, but
Okay.
I think the big corporations like RCA, and I
Mm-hmm.
think I read a quote from Sarnoff, which was
Mm-hmm.
he saw wealth based on the amount of people or viewers
Mm-hmm.
that were watching TV,
Mm-hmm.
which is, and this even has to do with the war leaders. You have to have a certain amount of faith or belief in what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the television stations initially, which are very big financial corporations,
Mm-hmm.
they initially gave out their programming for free.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, you turned on your TV, you bought the TV, but you did not pay for the service.
Mm-hmm.
There was large antennas like on the Empire State Building.
Mm-hmm.
These antennas would broadcast for 50 to 100 miles or more, and you would turn on your TV and you would get the stories and the plays and the news for free.
Mm-hmm.
Then advertisers started to pay money in order
Mm-hmm.
to present their products on TV.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a certain amount of faith, which was you believed in your investment, that if you
Mm-hmm.
got enough people interested in what you were doing, and that's your interest,
Mm-hmm.
enough people were interested in your principles, you were going
Mm-hmm.
to eventually profit from it. And this is the word profit. I
Mm-hmm.
think
My my point earlier was that uh, if love is the reason behind human exchange, and then I think the human civilization wouldn't have advanced to that level if it was based on love. I think money is okay. We can criticize it, but it is also a very good reason for motivation, for
well,
motivating.
the issue, I think it would have advanced if it was love, but human beings aren't that loving, and they
Okay.
they do steal and they do kill.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
what money is like oil. It's a lubricant.
Mm-hmm.
It's how do you exchange with people you disagree with
Mm-hmm.
politically or religiously.
Mm-hmm.
Money was sort of the oil or the lubricant where two different nations or two different belief systems could
Mm-hmm.
carry on exchanges, not based on belief, but
Mm-hmm.
based on currency or credit. That
Mm-hmm.
money provided an alternative way of evaluating the exchange because people always over evaluate their contribution, which is
Mm-hmm.
called their share. I mean, when you buy supposedly stocks, you're a
Mm-hmm.
shareholder, which is people overestimate the value of their
Mm-hmm.
share. That's even true financially
Mm-hmm.
because the value of stocks are based on credibility. They're not based on capital.
Mm-hmm.
And what capital is an actual holding of equipment or things of value, such as land. Probably the
Mm-hmm.
biggest capital is land
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't decay much. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you could have a factory, and if you go bankrupt, all the
You can
expensive
sell.
machinery you bought will depreciate by over
But
60%, if not 80.
mhm,
So
yes,
we have
but
depreciation.
the cost of the land would stay the same, or even it gets more.
Yeah. So we
Mhm,
have depreciation, which is the
mhm,
reverse of appreciation, which is you appreciate something or respect it, and you also have depreciation, which is it's no longer respected. And
yes.
it's significant. You buy a new car and you take it, it may, as soon as you own it, it may depreciate 10 or 20% because
Mhm,
it's no longer, even though it's only a month old, it's depreciated because it's not new. So how much we appreciate something or depreciate something is psychological. So much of economics is psychological. It's what we believe in, it's what we
mhm,
appreciate, it's what our
mhm,
principles are, it's how much interest we have in our principles, it's how much is our share overvalued, how much do the banks control the
mhm,
flow of the current
mhm,
current
mhm,
perception.
mhm,
So we're dealing with what war is and what religion is. Remember, I
mhm,
said the two bases
mhm.
of our modern concepts of financing come from war and come from religion.
General, yes.
And so basically what economics is mind control.
Mhm,
Repeat that. What
mhm,
economics is mind control.
mhm,
And it came out of armies and it came out of religion.
mhm.
So and it's becoming its own religion. Economics is actually becoming a
Mhm,
religion today.
mhm. Yes, I think you are right because the only thing that matters in the world today is money. If you want respect in the society, then you have to earn money. If you want better education, you have to have money. If you want health insurance, then you have to have money. If you want to succeed in life, then the only reason people are going to judge you in the society is because of money. If you want your parents to love you, then you have to have money. What about your relatives, your friends, neighbors, and everything they they are interested in is money. So I
To
think
some extent, but let's actually discuss this a little bit.
uh, okay.
So whoever accumulates capital, like Bill Gates of Microsoft,
Hmm.
they become like the capital of a government is called the capital, right? So
Yes,
whoever accumulates a lot of capital, like Bill Gates, becomes a government.
yes,
Of course,
and
they
he
can
becomes the
finance organizations like the
yes,
World Health Organization.
yes.
But
So
the
he can become also the most respected person in the world because of the wealth.
yeah,
So
well,
wealth is
we don't.
full.
Yeah, but we don't know whether he is the most respected. He could be the most hated. I mean, the
Yes.
Rockefellers were the most hated, and yet they still had money because they could control the currency, which was
Mhm,
the banks were controlling the media,
mhm,
the money interest. Wall Street was putting up a wall. We don't
mhm,
know what reality is.
mhm,
We know economic interests try to control reality, that economics is the control, is mind control.
mhm.
And
No,
so what led to the, I want me to get to this, but there is
okay.
reality.
Mhm,
There is flooding, there are earthquakes, there are
mhm,
hurricanes, and this is
mhm,
what the Japanese army was aware of. And I think the Japanese did very well in financing
mhm,
because they knew there were natural indicators.
mhm,
It isn't just what the wealthy control
mhm,
because people die, there are disasters, there are catastrophes.
mhm,
So when the mind control, when the economics goes too far in the wrong direction, and this is where
mhm,
religion comes in,
Mhm.
So-called, you have divine intervention, which is
Mhm.
usually a disaster, particularly a flood, which is a
Mhm.
bankruptcy. The banks of the river are ruptured, and now you have a serious flood. This even
Mhm.
happened in war. Julius
Mhm.
Caesar, in order to maneuver his troops, would have his men build a bridge across a river so they can go on either side, either for protection or attack. And then there would be big storms, and the flooding would wipe out the bridge
Mhm.
because he was building a temporary bridge.
Mhm.
And this was well aware of it because the Pontifex Maximus, which
Mhm.
Julius Caesar understood, Julius Caesar had the position of the high priest of Rome. Let me repeat that.
Mhm.
Julius
Mhm.
Caesar had the title of the high priest of Rome, which is Pontifex Maximus.
Mhm.
Pontifex Maximus meant maintainer or the greatest maintainer of the bridge.
Mhm.
And he knew how to build bridges. Julius Caesar was a,
Mhm.
was an expert at building bridges, and he knew that nature or flooding could
Mhm.
destroy the.
Mhm.
So he knew there was natural indicators that he could push his mind control just so far, and if it went too far away from, for lack of a better word, nature or
Mhm.
divine law, he was in
Mhm.
trouble.
Mhm.
So, so those are indicators,
Mhm.
which is people can push just like Napoleon or Hitler pushed into Russia, but because
Mhm.
they have superior numbers and superior weaponry, does not mean they can win the war. And the
Mhm.
Japanese were aware of this. This was called kamikaze.
Mhm.
Kamikaze represented divine win, which is when Kublai Khan tried to invade Japan with his ships were destroyed by a typhoon. And this
Mhm.
was the same with, I think, Xerxes the first invasion of Greece.
Mhm.
Xerxes, Xerxes' ships were destroyed by a typhoon. Same
Mhm.
war of 1812, when the British came into Washington, D.C., they were
Mhm.
pushed out by the divine wind. A hurricane pushed out the British invasion of D.C. The British burnt the Capitol, which was the mind control. And they did it with principles.
Mhm.
I'm not saying the British were correct. They said, "Who are you slave owners?" Which is
Mhm.
Washington and Jefferson. "Who are you
Mhm.
slave owners? How are you claiming you're for freedom?"
Mhm.
So I actually think war was based on certain standards.
Mhm.
So when the banking of an area got too
Mhm.
restrictive,
Mhm.
like I think, and I'm not sure, but this is a guess,
Mhm.
that Genghis Khan was so successful because he believed in freedom of religion,
Mhm.
which is certain areas got control, whether it was by bishops or mullahs, they
Mhm.
could totally destroy any innocent person who didn't go along with the mind control.
Mhm.
So war was getting supplies to the better people. Let me repeat that.
Mhm.
War may have been getting supplies to the better people. So the invasion of Iraq by the United States may have
Mhm.
been because Saddam Hussein was a dictator,
Mhm.
was attacking
And
good.
he was a
So
dictator.
maybe,
There were very good reports. There were
so yeah,
reports.
there's two types of logistics,
Mhm.
two types of financing.
Mhm.
There's money to the general population or supplies to the general population,
Mhm.
and there is supplies and money to the best people, and
Mhm.
the best people like Julian Assange,
Mhm.
who point out the wrongdoing of the empire, could be arrested. And this
Mhm.
goes to the storming of the Bastille during the French Revolution. The
Mhm.
king had become too repressive and was
Mhm.
arresting too many good people. So
Mhm.
the revolution started at the storming of the Bastille. which was
Mhm.
the release of the political prisoners. Even though there was only 7 people left in the Bastille, they were more
Mhm.
interested in the gunpowder for the
Mhm.
revolution. I'm not. There's always more than one or two or three or four causes. So when
Mhm.
I give you an interpretation, it's just one of
Mhm.
many. But what I'm
Okay.
saying is Saddam Hussein in Iraq became so repressive, he was
Mhm.
destroying many families.
Mhm.
So U.S. intelligence comes in and says, "Oh, we're going to supply those families, not the
Mhm.
general population."
Mhm.
So frequently, an army comes in to rescue a few people.
Mhm.
And that's because the original banking system has directed the credibility towards one religion or one belief, and they're up
Mhm.
against a so called prophet, someone that
Mhm.
should be showing profit, like
Mhm.
Moses, which
Mhm.
is the Egyptian Pharaoh did not want to recognize the
Mhm.
principles of Moses. And Moses
Mhm.
had such high principles, the Pharaoh could not totally blockade him.
Mhm.
So Moses then had to develop his own country or his own
Mhm.
currency or his own beliefs. So let me
Mhm.
repeat. Pharaohs tried to blockade Moses,
Mhm.
boycott him.
Mhm.
Moses stood up for his own beliefs and
Mhm.
had to leave. And he waited till Pharaoh realized after natural disasters,
Mhm.
which was Pharaoh was bankrupting. He was going
Mhm.
against law or divine law too much, had to let Moses go.
Mhm.
When he pursued Moses, his army was killed by a flood, the Red,
Mhm.
which is the bankruptcy.
Mhm.
Bankruptcy is consciousness went against him. So those in power try to control consciousness. A prophet, prophet, a
Mhm.
prophet says, no, there's a higher consciousness. You can't
Mhm.
control consciousness that much. And then there's
Mhm.
a bankruptcy, which is natural disasters.
Mhm.
So I'm saying the terms in economics reflect the control and the development of human consciousness and other consciousness. People can't
Mhm.
just do what they want, they have to
Mhm.
manipulate.
Yeah.
That was long.
So,
I don't want a hot conversation.
okay. I think we have covered enough. We have started from the wars, as wars are the main reason behind wars is economics and the logistics and many other reasons.
Yeah,
And we have,
generals are experts at supplies or
yes,
economics.
yes. And we also discussed the Roman legions and uh, the Crusaders, the Vikings, and the Chinese and other civilization, and the wars around the world. And from the historical perspective, we have realized uh, that economics is the main reason behind everything.
Well, not necessarily a main reason, is how we
Yeah,
talk about something. It's
yes,
a
it,
description. It's a
yes,
major description of what's going on. I wouldn't say
yes,
reason. I would say
yes,
description.
yes. There could be many descriptions, but it is one of them.
And it's an accurate description. I think most of the
Yeah.
time economics can be fairly accurate, so it's a good tool to use.
Mhm.
But then we have to be aware of the double meaning. We have to
Yes.
not only take the terms literally, we also
Mhm.
need to understand the symbolic meaning of the terms.
Yes. And we have covered enough. And if you have any questions, please leave it in the comment box below. And Ed and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks.
Okay,
And thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for your time. And thank you guys for joining us. Okay. Bye now. Have fun.